The night Nora Patterson stumbled through the wrought iron gates, bleeding from a gash across her ribs and delirious with fever. She thought she'd found salvation in the form of an emergency clinic. She'd been driving home from her shift at the inner-city medical center when her car had hydroplaned on the rain-slicked highway, sending her spinning into a guardrail. The impact had crumpled the driver's side door, and when she'd finally crawled free, disoriented and hurt, she'd seen the massive estate looming on the hillside above the road. Its windows glowed with warm light, and in her concussed state, the ornate architecture looked like the private hospital where she'd done her residency. The pain in her side was excruciating, and she knew enough about internal injuries to understand she needed help immediately. So she climbed. Through the rain, up the winding path, past gardens that seemed far too elaborate for any medical facility, until she reached the enormous double doors. They swung open before she could knock, and she fell forward into a marble foyer that belonged in a palace, not a clinic. A woman with snow-white hair and alabaster skin caught her before she hit the floor, and Nora's last coherent thought before darkness claimed her was that the woman's hands were impossibly cold. When she woke, she was lying on a velvet chaise in a room illuminated by candlelight. Her jacket had been removed, and someone had bandaged her ribs with expert precision. The pain had dulled to a manageable throb. As her vision cleared, she saw 5 figures standing in a semicircle around her, all watching with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely concealed hunger. They were beautiful in a way that defied normal human aesthetics. Each had the same porcelain white skin, the same otherworldly grace, but their hair varied from silver white to platinum, and their eyes held depths that made her stomach twist with instinctive unease. The tallest stood in the center, a man who radiated authority in every line of his aristocratic features. His hair fell to his shoulders in waves of pure white, and when his gaze met hers, she felt pinned in place by eyes the color of fresh blood. "You're awake?" he said, his voice like velvet over steel. "Good. You were muttering about patients and surgical schedules. We weren't certain if the head injury had caused permanent damage." Nora sat up slowly, pressing a hand to her bandaged side. "Where am I? Is this the Westmont Private Hospital? I thought it was further north." She looked around the opulent room with its antique furniture and oil paintings in gilded frames. "This doesn't look like any recovery room I've seen." The man's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "That's because this is not a hospital, Miss Patterson. This is my home. I am Lucien Draconis, and you have inadvertently trespassed into the court of eternal night." The words should have meant nothing to her, but the way he said them with such absolute certainty made her skin prickle. "Court? I don't understand. I need to get to a hospital. I'm a doctor. I know I have broken ribs, possibly internal bleeding." "You had 3 fractured ribs and a minor concussion," interrupted a woman with ice-blue eyes and hair braided into an elaborate crown. "No internal bleeding, though you lost a fair amount of blood from the laceration. Seraphine treated your wounds. You'll heal, though you should rest for several days." Nora stared at her. "How could you possibly know that without imaging? Did someone do an ultrasound while I was unconscious?" "We have our methods," the woman said smoothly. "I am Morgana Vesper, High Advisor to the King. The woman who caught you when you entered is Seraphine Noctis, our healer. These are Lord Valerian Cross and Lady Isadora Thorne. We are all members of King Lucien's inner circle." "King?" Nora repeated faintly. She looked at Lucien again, taking in his commanding presence, the way the others deferred to him with subtle shifts in posture. "This is some kind of historical reenactment society?" Valerian laughed, a sound like wind through a crypt. "Oh, she's delightful. May we keep her?" "Valerian," Lucien said softly, and the other man fell silent immediately, though his eyes still gleamed with amusement. The king turned back to Nora. "This is no game, Miss Patterson. We are vampires, and this manor is one of the last strongholds of vampire nobility in the modern world. You have entered our territory uninvited, and by our laws, that gives us certain rights regarding your fate." Nora stood up, ignoring the way the room tilted slightly. "Vampires? Right. And I'm supposed to believe that because you all have elaborate costumes and Gothic architecture?" She moved toward the door, determined to leave before this situation got any stranger. "Thank you for patching me up, but I really need to get to an actual medical facility and call for a tow truck." She reached for the door handle, but it didn't budge. Before she could try again, Lucien was beside her, having crossed the room in a blur of motion too fast for her eyes to track. His hand covered hers on the handle, and the touch of his skin was like ice. "I cannot allow you to leave," he said quietly. "Not yet. You've seen too much, and you are in no condition to travel safely. Remain here tonight, and we will discuss the terms of your departure in the morning." Nora yanked her hand away from his, heart hammering. "You can't keep me prisoner. I'm a trauma surgeon at County General. People will be looking for me when I don't show up for my shift tomorrow." "Then we shall ensure they believe you are recovering from your accident elsewhere," Morgana said. "Lucien, this is complicated. The girl is mortal and clearly has obligations in the human world, but she has seen our faces, walked our halls. We cannot simply release her with a pat on the head and hope she keeps our secrets." "I'm aware of the complications, Morgana." Lucien's gaze never left Nora's face. "But there is something else. Tell me, Miss Patterson, what do you sense when you look at us?" "That you're all extremely committed to this vampire aesthetic?" Nora shot back, though her voice shook slightly. She was beginning to suspect this wasn't a game, that something was genuinely wrong here, though her rational mind refused to accept the supernatural explanation. Isadora stepped forward, and Nora noticed for the first time how sickly the woman looked despite her ethereal beauty. Her skin had an almost translucent quality, and when she moved, it was with a careful slowness that spoke of pain. "My lady, she's a healer. Perhaps that's why the Manor's wards allowed her entry. Perhaps that's why none of us feel the usual hunger when we look at her." "What do you mean, allowed my entry?" Nora demanded. "The door was unlocked." "The door is never unlocked," Seraphine said softly. She was the woman who had caught Nora when she fell, and up close, her features were almost too perfect to be real. "Our wards repel humans unless we specifically permit them to enter. The fact that you walked through suggests the Manor itself wanted you here. Manors don't want things, they're buildings." But even as Nora said it, she felt a strange resonance in the air around her, as if the walls themselves were listening. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. "This is insane. You're all insane, and I need to leave." Lucien sighed, and the sound carried centuries of weariness. "Very well. If you cannot believe our words, perhaps a demonstration is in order. Valerian, if you would." The dark-haired vampire grinned, revealing fangs that extended with a small clicking sound. Before Nora could scream, he moved to the window and tore the heavy curtains aside. Moonlight flooded the room, and she saw his reflection in the glass, or rather, she didn't. The window reflected the room perfectly, but Valerian's image was completely absent. "Mirrors work the same way," he said cheerfully. "No reflection, no shadow in most light, and sunlight would turn me into a very attractive pile of ash. We're quite thoroughly vampiric, I assure you." Nora's knees gave out, and she sank back onto the chaise. Her medical training warred with the evidence before her eyes. Vampires weren't real. They couldn't be real. But she'd seen him move faster than any human could, felt Lucien's ice-cold skin, noticed that none of them seemed to breathe the way living people did. "This isn't possible," she whispered, "and yet here we are." Lucien crouched before her, bringing his face level with hers. "I understand your shock, Miss Patterson, but we waste time with denials. The truth is that you have entered our domain at a moment of great crisis, and I find myself wondering if fate has sent us an unexpected solution." "Crisis?" Nora forced herself to focus, falling back on her medical instincts because they were the only stable thing in a world that had suddenly turned upside down. "Isadora looks ill. Is it affecting all of you?" Morgana and Lucien exchanged glances. "Perceptive," Morgana murmured. "Yes, girl. We are all afflicted, though some more severely than others. A curse laid upon the court 6 months ago by a witch whose family we wronged generations past. It's slowly draining our immortal essence, turning our supernatural vitality against us. Seraphine is our healer, but her knowledge of vampire physiology doesn't extend to curse work. We've tried every remedy we know, consulted every magical practitioner we could locate, but the curse only grows stronger. Nora looked at each of them in turn, and now that she knew what to look for, she could see the signs. Valerian's humor had a brittle edge, as if he were using laughter to mask pain. Seraphine moved with deliberate care, conserving energy. Even Lucien, for all his commanding presence, had shadows under his crimson eyes that spoke of exhaustion. "What are the symptoms?" she asked, her clinical mind automatically cataloging what she observed. "Weakness," Lucien said. "Our strength diminishes daily. We tire easily, require more blood than usual, yet gain less sustenance from it. Our healing is slower, our senses dulled. For the younger members of the court, those turned within the last century, the effects are even more severe. 3 have already entered torpor, a sleep-like state from which they may never wake if the curse is not broken." "And you think I can help with a magical curse? I'm a surgeon, not a witch." "No," Lucien said slowly. "But you are a healer, and you walked through our wards when no mortal should have been able to. Perhaps there is more to you than you realize, Miss Patterson. Perhaps the Manor brought you to us for a reason." Nora wanted to argue, to insist that there had to be a rational explanation, but she was too tired and too overwhelmed. Instead, she asked, "If I stay and look at your people, if I try to understand what's happening to them, will you let me go afterward?" "If that is what you wish when the time comes, yes." Lucien extended his hand, and she noticed he wore several rings, each set with dark gemstones that gleamed in the candlelight. "You have my word as king of this court. Aid us however you can, and you will be free to leave with your life and your memories intact, should you choose." "Should I choose?" Nora repeated. "What's that supposed to mean?" His smile was enigmatic. "Only that choices have a way of changing as circumstances unfold. Do we have an accord?" Against every instinct of self-preservation, Nora reached out and shook his hand. His fingers were cold but strong, and the moment their skin touched, she felt a jolt of something she couldn't name, recognition, perhaps, or destiny asserting itself. His eyes widened fractionally, suggesting he'd felt it too. "We have an accord," she said quietly. The next morning, Nora woke in a bedroom that belonged in a fairy tale. The 4-poster bed was draped in midnight blue silk, and the windows looked out over ground so vast she couldn't see where they ended. Seraphine had left clothing for her modern jeans and a soft sweater, thankfully, not period costume, and she found a bathroom attached to her room that featured both antique fixtures and modern plumbing in an oddly seamless blend. When she emerged, she found Seraphine waiting in the hallway. In the daylight filtering through the covered windows, the vampire woman's beauty was almost painful to witness. "The king requests your presence in the infirmary," she said. "I'll take you there now." "The sun is up," Nora observed. "I thought vampires couldn't be awake during the day." "We can be awake, just not in direct sunlight. The manor's windows are specially treated to filter out the harmful rays while still allowing some light through. It weakens us to be active during daylight hours, but the curse has already weakened us so much that it hardly makes a difference anymore." Seraphine's expression was grim. "Come. The others are waiting." The infirmary was located in the east wing, a long room lined with beds that reminded Nora of historical hospital wards. About a dozen vampires lay in various states of distress, all of them looking far worse than the members of Lucien's inner circle. Some were conscious but clearly in pain, others unconscious and barely moving, their skin so translucent she could see the network of veins beneath. Lucien stood at the bedside of a young-looking vampire with silver hair cropped short. "This is Cassian," he said as Nora approached. "He was turned 30 years ago, which makes him one of our youngest. The curse hit him hard 3 weeks ago, and he hasn't woken since." Nora moved closer, her healer's instincts overriding her fear. She checked Cassian's pulse, faint and irregular, and examined his eyes, his skin tone, the way his chest barely rose and fell. "You said the curse is draining your immortal essence. What does that mean in practical terms?" "Our bodies are sustained by a combination of blood magic and the original curse that created our kind," Morgana explained from across the room. She was examining another patient, her face drawn with worry. "When we drink blood, it fuels this magic, keeps us strong and ageless. This new curse is like a parasite, feeding on that same magical energy. The more it takes, the closer we come to becoming truly dead rather than undead." So it's a parasitic magical infection attacking your core energy source. Nora processed this, translating supernatural terms into concepts she could work with. In medical terms, it's like an aggressive pathogen attacking the immune system. Have you tried any kind of magical antibiotics? Counter curses? Every counter curse we attempt either fails or makes the situation worse, Valerian said from where he lounged against the wall. He looked more serious now, without an audience to perform for. The witch who laid the curse was powerful, and she died immediately after casting it, taking the exact nature of the curse to her grave. Died how? Nora asked sharply. The curse consumed her life force to power itself, Lucien said. It was a blood curse, sealed with her death. Such magic is nearly impossible to break because there's no caster to negotiate with, no ongoing connection to Sévère. Nora walked slowly down the row of beds, examining each patient. Some reached out to her with trembling hands, others were too far gone to respond. She felt a growing sense of horror at the suffering before her, and underneath it, a strange pulling sensation in her chest, as if something inside her was responding to their pain. "Tell me about the witch," she said. "Why did she curse you? What was the wrong your court committed against her family?" The silence that followed was heavy with guilt. Finally, Lucien spoke. 200 years ago, my predecessor as king executed a vampire named Elena Thorne for the crime of loving a human. Our laws at the time forbade such relationships, viewing them as a threat to our secrecy and our power. Elena refused to give up her human lover, so she was sentenced to death by sunlight. Her lover, a man named Jonathan Cross, tried to save her and died in the attempt. Both were burned to ash. The witch who cursed us was their descendant, Morgana added quietly. Elena had a sister who survived, who married and had children. The curse was revenge, passed down through 6 generations until one of Elena's bloodline had enough power and hatred to enact it. So you're being punished for an ancient crime against love. Nora felt a bitter irony in that. And now you're asking me, a human, to save you from the consequences. Yes, Lucien said simply. I know we have no right to ask it, but the vampires suffering here committed no crime except being born into a court with a bloody history. Cassian wasn't even alive when Elena died. None of them were. Yet they suffer for the sins of their ancestors. Nora looked at the young vampire in the bed, at his peaceful face that would never age beyond whatever point he'd been turned. She thought about genetic diseases, about how children inherited the consequences of their parents' choices, about how unfair biology could be. This was the same, just in supernatural terms. I'm a doctor, she said finally. I took an oath to heal people regardless of who they are or what they've done. I don't know if I can help you, but I'll try. She turned to Lucien. I need to examine all the patients, take detailed notes on their symptoms, try to find a pattern. If this curse is like a disease, maybe I can approach it clinically. And I need to know everything about vampire physiology, how your bodies work, what sustains you, where your vulnerabilities lie. Seraphine will teach you, Lucien said. She knows more about our anatomy than anyone. And Miss Patterson? Thank you. Their eyes met, and Nora felt that strange jolt again, stronger this time. His gratitude was genuine, and underneath it, she sensed something else, interest, attraction, a connection forming despite the impossible circumstances. She looked away quickly, unsettled by her own response to him. Call me Nora, she said. If I'm going to be staying here, we might as well use first names. Over the next week, Nora threw herself into studying the curse with the same intensity she'd once applied to her medical training. Seraphine proved to be an excellent teacher, patiently explaining how vampire bodies functioned on both physical and magical levels. Nora learned that vampires' hearts beat only when they'd recently fed, that their blood was a mixture of their original human blood and that of all their victims, that their cells regenerated through magical means rather than biological processes. She examined every cursed vampire, noting their symptoms in meticulous detail. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. The curse attacked the magical connection between the vampire's consciousness and their body, slowly severing the bonds that kept them animated. It was like watching someone die of a degenerative neurological disease, except the degradation was happening on a metaphysical level. It's elegant in a horrible way, she told Lucien one evening as they reviewed her notes in his study. The curse doesn't destroy the body or the magic directly. It just disconnects them from each other. Eventually, you'd have a perfectly preserved corpse with a consciousness trapped inside it, unable to move or heal or feed, aware but helpless. Lucien's face was grim. That would be a fate worse than true death. The witch chose her revenge well. There has to be a way to reconnect what the curse is severing, Nora said, tapping her pen against the notebook. In medicine, when we have a severed nerve or blood vessel, we can sometimes repair it with surgery or therapy. What if we approach this the same way? Magical healing can't touch the curse, Seraphine said from where she sat by the fire. We've tried everything: binding spells, purification rituals, energy transfers. The curse consumes any magic we direct at it and grows stronger. Then maybe magic isn't the answer. Nora stood and began pacing the way she always did when working through a difficult problem. The curse is magical, yes, but vampires exist in the physical world. Your bodies are real, even if they're sustained by supernatural means. What if we treated the symptoms instead of the cause, kept your body strong enough to withstand the curse while we looked for a more permanent solution? How? Valerian asked. He'd become a fixture in these evening discussions, his sharp mind valuable despite his tendency toward sarcasm. We're already feeding more than usual, and it barely helps. Because the curse is draining the magic from the blood before you can fully absorb it, Nora said. But what if we supplemented that with non-magical sustenance? Vampires can digest blood because it contains life energy. What else contains life energy in a form you could process? The vampires exchanged glances. Are you suggesting we eat food? Morgana asked incredulously. We can't. Our bodies no longer process it the way human bodies do. But you can still taste it, can't you? Your senses work. When they nodded, Nora continued, then your taste buds and digestive tracts still exist, even if they're not your primary source of nutrition. What if we found foods rich in iron, in protein, in the building blocks of blood, and you consumed them alongside your regular feeding? It might not heal the curse, but it could slow the deterioration, buy us more time. It's worth trying, Lucien said slowly. Though I confess, I haven't eaten solid food in 3 centuries. I'm not certain I remember how. Despite the grim circumstances, Nora found herself fighting a smile at the image of the ancient vampire king learning to eat dinner again. We'll start with liquids, broths, smoothies, things easy to swallow. And I want to increase your blood intake, but from willing donors who are properly compensated and cared for. No hunting, no violence, clinical feeding. We've been using blood bank supplies, Seraphine said, but it's not as potent as fresh blood from a living source. Then we find living donors who understand what they're agreeing to. Nora met Lucien's eyes. I know your kind has a complicated history with consent, but if we're going to do this, we do it ethically. Agreed, Lucien said without hesitation. I'll reach out to our network. There are humans who know of our existence and provide blood in exchange for payment or other services. We'll arrange a rotation of willing donors. The plan was implemented immediately. Nora worked with Seraphine to create nutrient-rich supplements that the vampires could consume, and within 3 days they began to see results. The deterioration slowed. Cassian and 2 other vampires in torpor showed signs of regaining consciousness. It wasn't a cure, but it was hope, and hope was something the court had been lacking. As the days turned into weeks, Nora found herself settling into the strange rhythm of life in the manor. She kept her apartment in the city, and Lucien provided a driver to take her to and from her shifts at the hospital. But she spent most of her free time in the vampire court, monitoring her patients and refining her treatment protocols. She also found herself spending more time with Lucien himself. He was nothing like she'd expected a vampire king to be. Yes, he was commanding and powerful, with an aura of danger that never quite faded, but he was also thoughtful, curious about her world, and unexpectedly kind. He listened when she talked about her work, asked intelligent questions about medicine and ethics, and shared stories from his long life that were by turns fascinating and heartbreaking. One night, she found him in the library, a vast room filled with books in dozens of languages. He was reading by firelight, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. What are you reading? She asked, settling into the chair across from his. He held up the book so she could see the cover. Your medical journal article on trauma response in emergency surgery. I found it in our database. You're very accomplished for someone so young. I'm 32, Nora said. Not that young. I'm 743. His lips quirked. Forgive me if I find your youth charming. There was something in his tone that made her pulse quicken. Over the past weeks, she'd caught him watching her sometimes, his expression unguarded and hungry, in a way that had nothing to do with blood. She'd told herself it was her imagination, that an ancient vampire king couldn't possibly be interested in an ordinary human doctor, but the way he looked at her now made denial impossible. Lucien, she said carefully, why did you really let me stay? You could have compelled me to forget I'd ever seen this place, sent me away with altered memories. Why risk keeping a human in your court? He set the book aside and leaned forward, his red eyes intense. Because from the moment I saw you, unconscious and bleeding in my foyer, I felt something I haven't felt in centuries. Recognition, as if I'd been waiting for you without knowing it. He paused, seeming to choose his words with care. Our kind believes in fated mates, though such bonds are rare. When we find the one person whose soul calls to ours, we know it instantly. I've lived over 700 years without feeling that call, Nora. Until you. Her breath caught. That's impossible. I'm human. I'm mortal. I'll age and die while you stay exactly as you are. I know, he said quietly. Believe me, I've thought of nothing else these past weeks. I've tried to convince myself that what I feel is gratitude or simple attraction, but it's more than that. When you're near, the curse seems less unbearable. When you smile, I remember what it felt like to be human and hopeful. And when I imagine you leaving, returning to your mortal life and forgetting about us, about me, it feels like facing the sun would be preferable. Nora stood abruptly, her heart racing. You can't say things like that. Why not? He rose as well, moving around the desk until only a few feet separated them. Because it frightens you? Because you feel it too and don't want to? Because it's impossible. She heard the desperation in her own voice. I have a life, Lucien. A career, friends, a world that makes sense. This, she gestured around the library, at the impossible grandeur of the vampire court. This is beautiful and terrifying and completely insane. In a few weeks or months, you'll break the curse, and I'll go back to my normal life. That's how this has to end. Does it? He took a step closer, and she could feel the cold emanating from his skin, could see the ancient power in his eyes. What if I asked you to stay, not as a prisoner or even a guest, but as part of this court? As mine? I can't. But even as she said it, she felt the lie in the words. The truth was that she'd been happier these past weeks than she'd been in years. Her work at the hospital was important, but it had always felt like something was missing, some deeper purpose she couldn't name. Here, in this impossible place, healing people who shouldn't exist, she felt complete in a way she'd never experienced, and Lucien himself was a revelation. She'd spent her adult life avoiding relationships, telling herself she was too busy, too focused on her career. But the truth was that no one had ever made her feel the way he did, safe and challenged, protected and seen. When he looked at her, it was as if he perceived not just her surface, but the entirety of who she was, and found her worthy of his immortal attention. You feel it, he said softly, reading the conflict on her face. This connection between us. Tell me I'm not alone in this, Nora. Tell me you feel it too. She wanted to lie, to protect herself from the enormity of what he was offering, but she'd never been good at deception. I feel it, she whispered, but that doesn't mean we can act on it. You're a vampire king. I'm a human doctor. We live in different worlds. Then we'll find a way to bridge them. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his cold hand. I've spent centuries alone, Nora. I've had lovers and companions, but never a true mate. Now that I've found you, I won't let you go without fighting for what we could have together. And what could we have? She was trembling now, caught between longing and fear. A few years of happiness before I age and die? You'd watch me grow old while you stayed young. You'd watch me die. Lucien, how is that fair to either of us? His thumb traced her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "There are ways," he said. "If you chose it, if you truly wanted it, I could turn you. You would become like me, immortal, powerful, freed from the constraints of human fragility. Become a vampire." The words felt surreal on her tongue. "Give up everything I am. You would gain far more than you'd lose, and you would retain your essential self, your intelligence, your compassion, your skill as a healer. You would simply have eternity to practice it." His expression turned fierce. "But I won't pressure you. This would have to be your choice, made freely and without coercion. I'm simply telling you that the option exists, should you want it." Nora closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was offering. A part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to leap into this impossible future with both feet. But the rational part of her mind, the part that had gotten her through medical school and residency, demanded caution. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to think, to be sure. This is too important to decide in a moment." "Take all the time you need." He let his hand fall away from her face, though she could see the effort it cost him. "I've waited 7 centuries for you. I can wait a little longer." The breakthrough came 2 weeks later, in the middle of the night. Nora woke from a dream with her heart pounding and an idea blazing in her mind. She threw on clothes and ran through the Manor's hallways until she reached the infirmary, where Seraphine was tending to the patients. "The curse severs the connection between body and magic," Nora said without preamble. "What if we created a new connection, a temporary bridge that could sustain the vampires until we found a permanent cure?" Seraphine looked up from checking Cassian's vital signs. "What kind of bridge?" "A blood bond." Nora moved to the bedside, her mind racing through the implications. "I've been reading about vampire lore. When a vampire drinks from the same human repeatedly, it creates a connection between them, right? The human can sometimes sense the vampire's emotions, and the vampire becomes attuned to the human's life force." "Yes," Seraphine said slowly. "But such bonds are dangerous. They can lead to obsession, to the human becoming little more than a thrall. We avoid them for good reason. But what if we controlled it? What if we created intentional, limited bonds between willing human donors and the cursed vampires? The human life force could help sustain the vampire's connection to their body, like a magical bypass graft." Nora was pacing now, gesturing excitedly. "It wouldn't cure the curse, but it might stabilize the patients enough that we could try more aggressive counter-curse work without risking their complete dissolution." "It could work," Seraphine admitted, "but finding enough willing humans who understand the risks." "I'll be the first," Nora said immediately. "Bond Cassian to me. If it works, we can recruit others, set up proper protocols and safeguards. But I'll prove the concept first." "Absolutely not." Lucien's voice cut through the infirmary like a blade. He strode toward them, his expression thunderous. "I won't allow it. The risk to you is too great." "It's not your decision," Nora said, turning to face him. "I'm offering as a volunteer, as a medical professional who understands the risks and benefits. This could save lives, Lucien. And if the bond overwhelms you, if Cassian's need for life force drains you until you're the one dying," his hands clenched into fists at his sides, "I won't lose you, Nora, not for this." "You don't own me," she said quietly. "I care about you, but I'm still my own person, and this is my choice to make. I became a doctor to save lives, and I won't stop now just because the patient isn't human." They stared at each other, the air between them crackling with tension. Finally, Lucien closed his eyes and took a shaky breath. "If you're determined to do this, then bond with me instead. I'm stronger than Cassian, better able to control my instincts and ensure your safety. Use me as the test case." "You're already fighting the curse," Nora protested. "Adding a blood bond on top of that will be manageable precisely because I'm stronger." He opened his eyes, and the raw vulnerability in them took her breath away. "Please, Nora, if you must do this, let me be the one. At least then I can protect you from the worst effects." She wanted to argue, but she could see the logic in his proposal. And beneath that, she recognized his need to keep her safe, to maintain some control in a situation where he felt powerless. It was the same drive that had made her become a doctor in the first place, the need to fight back against helplessness and mortality. "All right," she said softly. "We'll create the bond between us. But we do it carefully, with monitoring and safeguards. and if it starts to harm either of us, we break it immediately. The ritual was simple but profound. Nora sat in Lucien's private chambers while Morgana prepared the space, drawing protective circles and lighting candles infused with herbs meant to strengthen willpower and maintain boundaries. Seraphine stood by with medical equipment, ready to monitor Nora's vital signs throughout the process. The bond is created through 3 exchanges of blood, Morgana explained. The vampire drinks from the human, then offers their own blood in return. This happens 3 times over the course of an hour, with rest periods in between. By the 3rd exchange, the connection will be established. Nora nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. She sat on a velvet sofa while Lucien knelt before her, his expression solemn. "Are you certain?" he asked one last time. "I'm certain." She held out her wrist, trying not to think about how intimate this felt, how different from any medical procedure she'd ever been part of. He cradled her wrist in both hands, his touch reverent. "This will hurt at first, but then you should feel pleasure. The venom in a vampire's bite induces euphoria to keep prey docile. If it becomes too intense, tell me and I'll stop." Before she could respond, he lowered his head and bit down. The pain was sharp and immediate, making her gasp, but within seconds it transformed into something else, entirely a wave of heat and pleasure that radiated from the bite site through her entire body. She felt his mouth on her skin, felt him drawing her blood into himself, and with it came a strange sense of connection, as if invisible threads were spinning out from her and winding around him. When he pulled back, his eyes were molten red, and his fangs were stained with her blood. "Now you drink from me," he said, his voice rough. He used one fang to open a vein in his own wrist and held it to her lips. Nora hesitated for only a moment before pressing her mouth to the wound. Vampire blood tasted like copper and starlight, cold but electric, and as she swallowed, she felt power surge through her veins. Her senses sharpened suddenly. She could hear the individual heartbeats of everyone in the room, could smell the herbs in the candles with perfect clarity, could see the magical energy dancing in the air around them. "That's enough," Lucien said gently, drawing his wrist away. The wound had already healed. "Rest now. We'll do the 2nd exchange in 20 minutes. The hour that followed was the strangest of Nora's life. With each exchange, the bond between them grew stronger. She began to feel his emotions as clearly as her own, his fierce protectiveness, his deep loneliness, his growing love for her that both terrified and exhilarated him. And she knew he could feel her in return, could sense her determination and her fear, and the way her heart had already surrendered to him, even as her mind tried to maintain caution. By the 3rd exchange, she could barely tell where she ended and he began. When he drank from her this time, she felt his hunger and his pleasure, as if they were her own. When she drank from him, she tasted centuries of memory and power, felt the weight of his crown and the loneliness of his immortal existence. When it was finished, they sat together on the sofa, both trembling with the force of what they'd created. Nora could feel him in the back of her mind now, a constant presence that was surprisingly comforting rather than intrusive. "How do you feel?" Seraphine asked, checking Nora's pulse and blood pressure. "Strange. Good. Connected." Nora looked at Lucien and saw wonder in his eyes that matched her own. "It worked. I can feel that it worked." "I can feel you," he said quietly. "Your life force, flowing through the bond. It's like standing in sunlight, warming me from within, strengthening the connection between my body and my magic." He stood and moved to the window, testing his newfound stability. "The curse is still there, but it's as if your vitality is reinforcing what the curse is trying to sever. Nora, this is brilliant." Over the next week, they monitored the bond's effects carefully. Lucien's symptoms improved dramatically, his strength returned, his senses sharpened, and he no longer tired as easily. The cost to Nora was manageable. She felt slightly fatigued and needed to eat more to compensate for the energy the bond drew from her, but nothing that interfered with her daily life. More importantly, the bond itself became a source of unexpected joy. She could sense Lucien's presence wherever he was in the manor, could feel his emotions like a song playing at the edge of her consciousness. When she was stressed or frightened, his steady strength flowed through the connection, calming her. When she was happy, she felt his delight in her joy, amplifying it. And Lucien seemed transformed by the bond. The weariness that had shadowed him since the curse began lifted, and she often caught him watching her with an expression of such profound tenderness that it made her breath catch. With the success of their bond proven, they began creating similar connections between other cursed vampires and willing human donors. Morgana reached out to the network of humans who already knew about vampire society, offering generous compensation and thorough medical monitoring in exchange for forming bonds. Within 2 weeks, all the critically ill vampires had been stabilized through blood bonds, and the court began to breathe easier. But the curse itself remained, and Nora knew the bonds were only a temporary measure. They needed a real cure, and she was no closer to finding one. The answer came from an unexpected source. One evening, as Nora sat in the library researching historical accounts of curse breaking, Isadora approached her with a shy expression. "May I speak with you?" the vampire asked. "About the curse and its origins?" "Of course." Nora set aside her books, noting the careful way Isadora moved. Even with a blood bond to sustain her, the curse's effects were still visible. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about what you said when you first arrived, about how we're being punished for a crime against love." Isadora settled into a chair across from Nora. The curse was laid by a descendant of Elena Thorne to avenge the deaths of Elena and her human lover. It was an act of rage and grief, fueled by blood magic. "Right. Which is why it's so hard to break blood curses sealed by death are notoriously permanent." "Yes, but what if we're approaching this wrong?" Isadora leaned forward intently. "We've been trying to break the curse through force, through counter-magic and purification rituals. But the curse was born from love being destroyed. What if the cure isn't force, but the opposite? What if we need to heal what was broken by showing that love between vampires and humans is possible? That Elena and Jonathan's deaths weren't in vain?" Nora felt a chill run down her spine as the implications sank in. "You think the bonds we've created might be more than just a treatment for symptoms. You think they could be the cure itself." "More than that." Isadora's eyes gleamed. "I think your bond with Lucien might be the key. You're not just a random human, you're his fated mate, and you've chosen to bind yourself to him despite knowing the risks. You're proving that the law Elena died for was unjust, that vampire-human love can exist and even heal. That's powerful symbolism, Nora. In magic, symbolism is everything." The idea was outrageous, but it resonated with something deep in Nora's understanding of the curse. She'd been thinking of it in medical terms, as a disease to be cured, but magic didn't work like biology. Magic was about intention and meaning, about cosmic balance and poetic justice. "How would we test this?" she asked. "Matter over." "Marry him," Isadora said simply. "Not just a blood bond, but a true union recognized by both vampire and human law. Show the universe that what Elena and Jonathan tried to build can exist, that their deaths led to change rather than just more tragedy. If I'm right, if the curse is rooted in the need for cosmic justice, then your union might satisfy that need and break the curse entirely." Nora stood and walked to the window, her mind reeling. Marriage. She'd barely admitted to herself that she loved Lucien, and now Isadora was suggesting she marry him to break a curse. It felt rushed, impulsive, completely insane, but she couldn't deny that it felt right in a way nothing else had. "I need to talk to Lucien," she said finally. She found him in his chambers, reviewing reports from other vampire courts about their own experiences with curse work. He looked up when she entered, and his expression immediately shifted to concern. "What's wrong?" "I felt your distress through the bond." "Nothing's wrong. Or maybe everything is. I don't know." She crossed the room to stand before him. "Isadora has a theory about how to break the curse. She thinks our bond, our relationship, might be the key. She thinks if we marry, if we prove that vampire-human love can exist openly and proudly, it might satisfy the cosmic justice the curse is seeking." Lucien went very still. "Marriage. I know it's crazy. We've only known each other a few weeks and we haven't even really dated, and I'm not even sure I'm ready to—" She was rambling now, nervous energy spilling out in words. "But it makes a strange kind of sense, doesn't it? The curse was born from love being punished. Maybe it can only be healed by love being celebrated." "Nora," He caught her hands in his, stopping her frantic pacing. "Slow down. Are you saying you want to marry me?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I mean, yes, maybe. If I'm being honest, I've been falling in love with you since the first night I woke up and saw you standing there, and the bond has only made it stronger. When I think about leaving here, about going back to my old life without you, it feels like tearing myself in half. So yes, I think I want to marry you, but I also don't want to do it just to break a curse. I want it to mean something." His smile was like dawn breaking. "Nora Patterson, I've lived for over 700 years, and in all that time, I have never met anyone like you. You are brilliant and brave and compassionate beyond measure. You walked into my cursed court and brought healing not just to my people but to my soul. I would marry you tomorrow if you'd have me, curse or no curse. If our union also happens to save my court, then that's simply one more reason to celebrate it." "You're serious?" She stared at him, seeing the truth blazing in his crimson eyes. "You actually want this? With everything I am?" He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to each palm. "I wanted to court you properly, to give you time to know me without the pressure of the curse hanging over us. But if you're willing, if you truly want this, then I will marry you and spend eternity proving that you made the right choice." "I'm terrified," Nora whispered. "So am I." He drew her closer until she was standing between his knees and their faces were level. "This is new territory for both of us, but we'll navigate it together, and whatever comes, we'll face it side by side." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. His lips were cool but gentle, and through the bond, she felt his love and desire tangled with her own until she couldn't tell the difference. When they finally broke apart, both breathless despite his lack of need for air, she was grinning. "Okay," she said, "let's do it. Let's get married and break a curse and probably make a lot of people think we've lost our minds." "My favorite kind of plan," he said, and kissed her again. The wedding was planned for 2 weeks later, giving them time to make arrangements in both the vampire and human worlds. Nora explained to her colleagues at the hospital that she'd met someone and was taking a leave of absence to get married, which earned her shocked congratulations and more than a few questions about the mysterious groom she'd never mentioned. She couldn't exactly tell them she was marrying a 700-year-old vampire king, so she settled for describing Lucien as a private businessman who preferred to stay out of the spotlight. In the vampire court, preparations took on a frenzied pace. The manor was cleaned and decorated until it gleamed, and vampires from allied courts were invited to witness the union. Morgana took charge of the magical aspects of the ceremony, preparing rituals that would bind Nora and Lucien in the eyes of both human and supernatural law. "The ceremony will have 2 parts, Morgana explained during one planning session. "First, a traditional human wedding with legal documents and witnesses. Then, a vampire binding ritual that will tie your souls together on a metaphysical level. Combined with the blood bond you already share, it will create one of the strongest unions possible between our kinds." "And you really think this will break the curse?" Nora asked. "I think it has the best chance of anything we've tried." Morgana's expression was cautiously hopeful. "The curse demands justice for Elena and Jonathan, for love that was destroyed by unjust laws. Your union demonstrates that those laws have been overturned, that their sacrifice led to real change. Symbolically, it's perfect. Whether that's enough to satisfy a blood curse?" She shrugged. "We'll find out." The night before the wedding, Nora stood in her bedroom at the manor, looking at the white dress that hung on the closet door. It was a beautiful gown that Seraphine had helped her choose, simple but elegant, with lace sleeves and a flowing skirt that made her feel like a fairy tale princess. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Seraphine or Isadora. Instead, Lucien entered, looking somewhat sheepish. "I know it's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding, but I needed to talk to you." "Cold feet?" she asked, trying to make it a joke but unable to keep the anxiety from her voice. "Never." He crossed to her and took her hands. "But I need to make sure you understand what you're agreeing to. If this works, if our marriage breaks the curse, you'll be bound to me forever. And I'm going to be selfish, Nora. I'm going to ask you to let me turn you, to become a vampire so we can have eternity together. I know it's asking you to give up your humanity, your mortal life, but I can't bear the thought of losing you to age and time." "I know," she said softly. "I've been thinking about it. And I've decided that if the curse breaks, if we prove that this between us is real and lasting, then yes, I'll let you turn me. Because I want eternity with you too." His expression transformed, joy and relief and love all washing over his features. Through the bond, she felt his emotions like a symphony, beautiful and overwhelming. "You mean it?" "I mean it." She reached up to cup his face, feeling the coolness of his skin against her palms. "I spent my whole life trying to save people from death, fighting against mortality. But maybe the answer isn't fighting it. Maybe it's transcending it. With you." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, pouring centuries of loneliness and longing into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, both of them were shaking. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "Let you rest before tomorrow." "Stay," Nora said impulsively. "Just to talk, to be close. I don't want to be alone tonight." So they lay together on her bed, fully clothed but tangled in each other's arms, talking in whispers about their hopes and fears and dreams for the future. Somewhere near dawn, Nora fell asleep to the sound of Lucien's voice, describing the places he wanted to show her once she was vampire and could travel freely at night. The wedding took place at midnight in the Manor's grand ballroom. The room had been transformed into something out of a dream, with thousands of candles casting warm light over white flowers and silver ribbons. Vampires in formal attire filled the seats, their pale faces solemn and hopeful as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Nora walked down the aisle alone, having no family to give her away but not needing any. This choice was hers and hers alone. She wore the white dress and carried a bouquet of night-blooming jasmine, and when she saw Lucien waiting for her at the altar, her breath caught at how handsome he looked in his formal black suit, his white hair pulled back to reveal his aristocratic features. The human ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to love and honor each other across the divide between mortal and immortal, human and vampire. When Lucien slipped the ring onto her finger, a silver band set with a ruby that matched his eyes, Nora felt tears slip down her cheeks. Then came the vampire binding ritual. Morgana stepped forward, chanting in a language so old that Nora didn't recognize it. The air began to shimmer with magical energy, and she felt the blood bond between her and Lucien flare to life, burning bright and fierce. Morgana produced a ceremonial dagger and instructed them each to make a small cut on their palms. "Join hands," Morgana commanded. "Let your blood mingle and your souls intertwine. By the old laws and the new, by the power of willing hearts, I bind you together as one." Nora pressed her bleeding palm to Lucien's, and the moment their blood touched, the world exploded into light. Through the bond, through her very soul, she felt something vast and ancient shift, like a key turning in a lock that had been closed for generations. The curse that had been draining the court's vitality suddenly shattered, its dark energy dissipating like smoke in wind. Every vampire in the room gasped simultaneously as their strength returned in a rush. Cassian, who had been watching from a wheelchair, stood up with a cry of joy. The three vampires who had been in torpor sat up in their beds in the infirmary, awakened by the sudden lifting of the curse's weight. And through it all, Nora felt Lucien's love surrounding her, felt their souls binding together with ties that would last for eternity. When the light finally faded, she found herself crying openly, overwhelmed by the beauty and power of what they'd created together. "It worked," she whispered. "We broke it." "We did more than that." Lucien pulled her close, his voice rough with emotion. "We healed it. We took the pain and injustice of the past and transformed it into something beautiful. Elena and Jonathan's deaths meant something after all. They led to this moment, to us." The celebration that followed went on until dawn. Vampires who had been weakened and despairing for months danced with wild abandon, rejoicing in their returned strength. Nora was swept into embrace after embrace, thanked and blessed by people who had once been wary of her human presence in their court. But through it all, she remained connected to Lucien, their bond humming with joy and love and perfect contentment. When the party finally began to wind down as sunrise approached, he led her to his chambers, their chambers now, she realized. "Are you ready?" he asked, his meaning clear. The turning. The transformation from human to vampire. Yes, she said without hesitation. I want this. I want forever with you. The process was both painful and transcendent. Lucien made it as gentle as he could, but there was no way to turn someone without bringing them to the edge of death first. He drank from her deeply, more than he ever had before, until her heartbeat slowed and her vision began to fade. Then he opened his wrist and held it to her lips, feeding her his ancient blood until it overwrote her human biology with something new and immortal. The transformation took 3 days, during which Nora existed in a fever dream of pain and change. Her body was dying and being reborn simultaneously, every cell rewriting itself according to vampire nature. Lucien stayed with her throughout, his presence through the bond the only thing that kept her anchored. When she finally woke on the 3rd evening, the world had changed. Her vision was preternaturally sharp, able to see in perfect clarity despite the room's dim lighting. She could hear conversations happening in distant parts of the manor, could smell the blood of the human donors who lived in the guest wing, could feel magical currents in the air like rivers of light. And she was hungry. Ravenously, painfully hungry in a way she'd never experienced as a human. Easy, Lucien said, helping her sit up. The hunger is always worst at first. Here. He offered her a crystal glass filled with fresh blood, and she drank gratefully, marveling at how good it tasted, how it filled the aching void inside her. When the glass was empty, she looked down at her hands and saw that her skin had taken on the same alabaster pallor as the other vampires, flawless and ageless. Her hair, when she caught sight of it in a mirror, had lightened to a pale honey blonde, and her eyes were crimson, just like Lucien's. I'm beautiful, she whispered, awed by her own transformation. You always were, Lucien said. But yes, the change has only enhanced it. How do you feel? Powerful, hungry, alive in a way I never was before. She turned to him, and the bond between them had intensified with her transformation until she could feel not just his emotions, but his very thoughts when he let his guard down. Is it always like this? The intensity fades with time, but the core of it remains. You're a vampire now, Nora. Immortal, powerful, and bound to me for as long as eternity lasts. He pulled her close, and she could feel his heartbeat slow and faint but present, activated by the blood he'd recently consumed. Are you happy? Deliriously, she said, and kissed him to prove it. The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment and discovery. Nora learned to control her newfound strength, to move with vampire speed and grace, to sense the supernatural currents that flowed through the world invisible to human perception. She was still a healer at heart, and she threw herself into studying vampire medicine with Seraphine, learning to treat supernatural ailments with a combination of her medical knowledge and her new magical understanding. She also discovered that her transformation had given her an unexpected gift. Because she'd been a healer as a human, and because she'd formed a blood bond with Lucien before turning, her vampire abilities manifested with a healing aspect. She could sense illness and injury in others with perfect accuracy, could channel her own vitality into the sick or wounded to speed their recovery. You're a healing vampire, Morgana said with wonder when Nora demonstrated this ability by curing a vampire who had been injured in a challenge fight. I've never heard of such a thing. The combination of your human skills, your natural empathy, and the circumstances of your turning created something entirely new. Word of Nora's abilities spread through the vampire world, and soon she was receiving requests from courts across the globe to train their healers in her methods. She and Lucien traveled together, visiting ancient vampire strongholds in Europe and Asia, forging alliances and friendships while teaching others how to blend modern medicine with supernatural healing. But they always returned to the manor, to the court that had become their home. Cassian and the other young vampires recovered fully from the curse, their vitality restored and their futures bright. The human donors who had formed bonds with vampires were given the choice to remain bonded or have the connections safely severed, and most chose to stay, having found deep friendships and even romances with their vampire partners. Isadora, who had first suggested that love might be the cure for the curse, found her own happiness with a human artist who had come to the manor to paint portraits of the court. Valerian, ever the charming rogue, declared that he was content to remain unattached for at least another century or two. Morgana and Seraphine continued to serve as Lucien's closest advisors, helping him guide the court into a new era of cooperation between vampires and humans. And Nora and Lucien ruled together, king and queen of the court of eternal night, proving every day that love could bridge any divide, heal any wound, and transform even the darkest curse into something beautiful. 1 year after their wedding, they stood together on the manor's highest balcony, looking out over the grounds as night fell. Nora leaned back against Lucien's chest, perfectly content in his arms. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up your human life, your career at the hospital, your mortality?" "Never," she said firmly. "I have a different career now, healing vampires and teaching others to do the same. I have forever to perfect my skills, to help people in ways I never could as a mortal. And I have you." She turned in his arms to face him. "How could I regret any choice that led to this?" "I spent 7 centuries alone," Lucien said, brushing a strand of pale hair from her face. "I'd convinced myself that I was content with solitude, that ruling and protecting my court was purpose enough. Then you stumbled through my doors, bleeding and delirious, and absolutely determined to heal people who shouldn't exist, and everything changed. You gave me hope, Nora. You gave me love. You gave me a future I never dared imagine." "We gave each other those things," she corrected softly. "This isn't a fairy tale where you saved me or I saved you. We saved each other. We chose each other despite every logical reason not to, and we created something stronger than either of us could be alone." He kissed her then, deep and sweet and full of promise, and through their bond, she felt his absolute certainty that they would face whatever came together for all of eternity. Below them, the manor glowed with warm light, filled with vampires and humans living in harmony, proof that love could triumph over prejudice and fear. The curse that had once threatened to destroy the court had been broken by a wedding between enemies turned lovers, and in its place grew something new and beautiful. A court where vampire and human could exist side by side, where ancient power met modern compassion, where death and life intertwined in perfect balance. And at the center of it all stood Nora and Lucien, former human doctor and vampire king, now bound together by blood and magic, and love that would last until the stars burned out. She had mistaken his manor for a hospital that rainy night, seeking healing for her physical wounds. Instead, she had found her destiny, her purpose, and her eternal mate. Sometimes she reflected as Lucien lifted her into his arms and carried her back inside toward their private chambers. The best things in life came from getting completely, wonderfully lost. Their story had begun with a mistake, a wrong turn in the rain, a desperate search for help that led her to the last place a human should go. But that mistake had become the foundation of something extraordinary. She had healed his cursed court with medicine and compassion and her own life force given freely. He had healed her lonely heart with love and devotion and the promise of forever. In the end, the human who had stumbled into the Vampire King's manor seeking healing had become the queen who healed them, all body, soul, and spirit. And they all lived on, immortal and joyful, proof that even in a world of darkness and death, love remained the most powerful magic of all. The curse was broken. The court was saved. And Nora Patterson, formerly human doctor, now vampire queen and healer, had found her true home in the arms of the king she'd accidentally discovered, deliberately saved, and eternally loved. Their forever had only just begun, and it stretched before them like an endless night sky full of stars, beautiful, vast, and infinitely full of possibility. Hand in hand, heart to heart, soul to soul, they would face it together, now and always. And in the great ballroom where they had wed, where a curse had shattered and a new era had begun, the candles still burned bright, testament to the enduring power of love to transform even the darkest fate into light.